friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. We are back in the kitchen today with a canning tip for you. So I had a panic moment recently after canning some spaghetti sauce, and it sent me on a research spree, and I learned a lot and learned something incredibly helpful to me, and I want to pass that along to you in case it is helpful to you. So spaghetti sauce. This is going to be for pizza sauce, spaghetti sauce, or tomato sauce. This tip is going to apply to all of those. So I made my spaghetti sauce in my roaster, and I've been seeing a lot of people do that recently. And it just allows you to make a very large batch at one time. And in order to puree up your sauce in a roaster, you're typically going to be using an immersion blender, which is what I used. And when I pulled my jars out of the canner, immediately I saw this, but even 24 hours after they came out of the canner, I still saw this, and it freaked me out. So let me show you what I saw, and I really hope the camera can pick that up. If you can see all of those little air bubbles all over this, all inside this tomato sauce. Now typically you don't want to see a bunch of air bubbles like that. It's not exactly normal. It's not ideal, at least. And in fact, bubbles, a lot of bubbles, and especially foamy looking bubbles inside a canning product can indicate that bad bacteria has gotten in there and fermented, and it would be dangerous to eat. You wouldn't be able to eat it. And I canned up all my tomatoes, y'all, so my entire harvest and a case that I had bought was invested into this sauce. I was like, oh no. So I went to the National Center for Food Home Preservation. I searched through their documentation. I went to Ball's website, searched through their documentation, and they both agreed on what was happening. And so then I went into Facebook groups and looked for personal experience from other ladies and from other people who have experienced this, and it all lined up, and now I understand what happened. So if you use a blender or an immersion blender, or even just a regular blender to puree your sauce or chop up your vegetables or whatever the case may be, and your end product is kind of liquidy like a sauce, you are essentially aerating that liquid before you can it. So you're putting a bunch of air into that liquid with the blender, and that's what's creating all of these little bubbles. Very thick liquids like spaghetti sauce and applesauce or pear sauce, any of your fruit sauces that are really kind of thick, those little pockets of bubbles all over are they're common in those types of liquids. Even if you debubble, I debubbled all of these jars. I took my little stick and I debubbled them all just like I'm supposed to do, and I still ended up with all of these bubbles. So the one thing that I wanted to make sure was, well, what kind of tests can I perform? What kind of visual cues can I look for to know for sure? Because I do know from past studying that bubbles in the finished product, especially foamy looking bubbles or bubbles that kind of move or fizz, is like a big no-no. You do not want to eat that. It's dangerous. Bad bacteria has fermented. So how can I know for sure to give me peace of mind? And here's what I found in the documentation from both Ball and the National Center for Food Home Preservation. And that is, if the bubbles are inert, meaning they're not moving. If you can, let me try to get you a good angle here. If you can look at the bubbles and they're not fizzing upwards, they're not really expanding, and there's not any upward movement with those bubbles, it's okay. If these bubbles, and even if I shake it, look what happens when I shake it a little bit. See, those bubbles aren't moving. Now, if you agitate bubbles that have bad bacteria and there's a fermentation process that's taken place, when you give that jar a shake, it's gonna those bubbles are gonna shoot up to the top. But these bubbles are stationary; they are not moving at all. So, on the other hand, if those bubbles are moving, just sitting here on the counter, and they're just moving up, they're fizzing up to the top, and especially if they are foamy, kind of at the ring where I had a bunch of siphoning in this jar, by the way. You're supposed to have a 1-inch headspace, and I just had a lot of siphoning. It's still okay though. The rule is half of the jar. If your contents are still half full, then you're good to go. So this jar, even though it's siphoned, it's still safe. But anyway, if those bubbles are moving and they're fizzing up to the top, and especially if you open your jar, you hear a little kind of fizz noise, and then all of those bubbles that you saw rush to the top, that's the sign that it is a bad bacteria that has fermented and your food is no longer safe to consume. So I hope that helps y'all. Little bubbles like this in thick sauces like spaghetti sauce, pizza sauce, applesauce, it's okay, and it probably happened because you may have used a blender or like a food immersion blender. Okay, y'all, we will see y'all next time. Bye.